to the meat of the Bible, God. We love you so much, and we pray all these things in your Son's name. Amen.
Amen. All right. New study today, new chapter, Esther 3, Haman, the manufactured anti-Semite. You know, in this chapter, we're going to get a blueprint of how anti-Semitism is manufactured and actually funded by the government, along with quasi-government groups such as the Southern Poverty Law Center and groups like that, in order to create the false narrative of victimhood. In other words, the government and quasi-government groups create the Hamans. That would be your haters, your neo-Nazis, your extremists, the terrorists, you know, the guy that wants to kill all the Jews, okay? The government and quasi-government groups actually create these guys, and then they turn around and expose them for who they are, and so forth. But after they create these Hamans, they sound the alarm about how dangerous the Haman is. Next, anyone who questions, let's say, the state of Israel or Zionism, or powerful people masquerading as Jews, those who are calling themselves Jews, they slander them. Anybody who's questioning these groups, they slander them as anti-Semites and dangerous people who must be stopped at all costs. And this illusion or this spell literally protects the Zionists and other powerful forces from any form of criticism. Since they are viewed as the victims, they can literally commit any evil they want. And if anyone calls them out or questions them, they are immediately labeled as an anti-Semite. You know, you're an anti-Semite. How could you say that, anti-Semite? And so that's really the whole purpose of this book is to create that illusion, the book of Esther. In other words, make the villains the victims of the truth tellers. Okay, make the villains the victims of the truth tellers. All right. The verse that kind of documents everything I just said there in this introduction is from Isaiah chapter 5, verse 20. This is the whole illusion, the whole scheme. It gets played out over and over again. You would think that it's so simple everyone would see it, but it's not, because if they repeat it enough, it literally becomes a spell. They're the wizards casting a spell on the people by simply using this tactic over and over again. This is the most simple spell. Woe unto them that call evil good and good evil, that put darkness for light and light for darkness. They literally invert everything. Good is evil, evil is good, and they say it over and over again so that you believe it. We're going to watch a little clip from Jonathan Cahn here. Jacob, if you want to go to clip. Okay, clip.
Anti-Semites are especially drawn to the book of Esther. That's right, to try to use it against the Jews, to attack the Jews. They hate the book, and the book exposes them. Do you know that for centuries, anti-Semites have been using the book of Esther to try to attack Jews with it? In the Russian Empire, anti-Semites used the book of Esther to say the Jews were plotting against Christian society. It sounds basically what Tucker has alluded to, Candace Owens, and the rest. It would strongly suggest they are all connected to that ancient spirit, stream, agenda, force of darkness.
All right, so anybody who questions, according to Jonathan Cahn, anybody who questions the book of Esther, first he says the anti-Semites are fascinated with this book. What does that tell all the listeners right away? Beware of anybody who's literally studying the book of Esther chapter by chapter and verse by verse and trying to understand what it really means, because this is what dangerous anti-Semitic people do. They look deep into the book of Esther. And number two is he's saying that, what was I going to say about that? Well, The other point I'm going to make about what he said there in that clip is he says it's all part of an ancient darkness, okay? Darkness being, okay, what slipped my mind was he's saying that Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, or anybody who questions this book in any way is part of this ancient, he always uses those words to really fascinate people, to really get you kind of spellbound. Ancient mystery, ancient thing that started a long time ago. And that ancient thing is, of course, if you look at the book of Esther and question some of the motives and intents here, you are a Haman. So right away, anybody who hears this is totally frightened to death that you can't look into this, or you're a Haman. Now, here's the thing that he doesn't bring up. He accuses people of looking into this book with a critical eye as being part of the forces of darkness. What he doesn't bring up is the fact that Esther literally means, and the rabbis completely acknowledge this. I even had one person acknowledge this week, acknowledge this point. They don't deny that Esther is a variation of the name Ishtar, the Babylonian sex goddess, and Mordecai represents the chief Babylonian god, the chief political god of Babylon, named Marduk. And they don't question that, but they try to kind of spin it around and say, well, it's okay because of this, and that, or whatever. Daniel had a Babylonian name, 3 Hebrew children, but the problem is, the thing is that the book of Daniel isn't named after Daniel's Babylonian name, okay? The book of Esther, and there's much more to this. The book of Esther, literally, when you look at the name of the book, you're literally looking at Ishtar, the Babylonian sex goddess. Now that should, right away, he's saying that if we question this book in any way, we're part of the forces of darkness. Well, anyone with a little bit of common sense would see, wait a second, we're not supposed to worship false gods. We're not supposed to get into Babylonian gods and goddesses and revere them and mimic them and do all this stuff. So why in the heck are all these Christians looking at this book of Esther and looking at Esther as the hero and Mordecai as the heroes, when in fact the Bible tells us that Babylonian gods are villains? They're evil. They're not to be messed with. And you're going to see that there's some sorcery involved in here. We're going to get into it here in a little bit. So just wanted to point that right off the bat. This week I might do a point-for-point rebuttal of his video there. Jonathan Conde had like a 45-minute video trying to say that anti-Semites question the book of Esther, but really it's all going to be turned around on them, and they're going to be the Haman and all this kind of stuff. So we'll see. I might, if I have time, I might go point for point, sit down at my desk here and play clips of him going through his points. So a little quick view of Esther chapter 3 of what we're going to get into. Chapter 3, verses 1 through 6, Mordecai the Jew provokes Haman. Okay, Mordecai the Jew provokes Haman. Verse number 7, the occult pagan origins of Purim. We're going to learn about that. In verses 8 through 11, it's going to be about Haman, the manufactured or created anti-Semite. In verses 12 through 15, we're going to see an instance of government-funded anti-Semitism. All right, let's get into this. Chapter 3, verse 1, and it reads, "And after these things, did King Ahasuerus promote Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, and advanced him and set his seat above all the princes that were with him." All right, now we're introduced to this Haman character. What I want you to know is, because we know that this book is not historical. We went into that already. I'm not going to go into that. The book of Daniel is historical. The book of Ezra was historical. The book of Nehemiah were historical. And they all took place during this time. And nobody mentioned anything about Esther and Mordecai and all these people. The Persian records do not record anything about the book of Esther. Okay. So this is what you got to understand is this is a fictional story. It is a fable, right? It's a fable. What's it designed to do? Well, it's designed to be a playbook on how to gain political power and control through casting this illusion over the minds of the people that these people who claim to be Jews literally are Jews when they're not. These guys are of the synagogue of Satan, and they are the persecuted victims rather than the villains. With that said, we have Haman here, a total creation of the writer here of this book of Esther. But I want you to see the details. We need to pay attention to the details because this is their playbook. This is the blueprint of how they cast this spell upon the world and especially Christians. Ahasuerus represents the state or the government. You see here that the government literally promotes or advances Haman from the very beginning. And we'll talk about specific instances of that here in a little bit. I'll give you real life examples of how that happens. And it's not conspiracy theory. It's not what if and what if. It's literally facts in court records, okay? All right, verse 2. And all the king's servants that were in the king's gate bowed and reverenced Haman, for the king had so commanded concerning him. But Mordecai bowed not, nor did him reverence. So Haman's promoted to this great place of honor next to the king, and now everybody's honoring him except for Mordecai, the little man, worshiper of Mars, or the chief Babylonian god, okay, dressed as disguised as a Hebrew or a Jew. Verse 3, then the king's servants, which were in the king's gate, said unto Mordecai, why transgressest thou the king's commandment? Now it came to pass, when they daily spake unto him, and he hearkened not unto them, that they told Haman to see whether Mordecai's matters would stand, for he had told them that he was a Jew. All right. And when Haman saw that Mordecai bowed not, nor did him reverence, then was Haman full of wrath. So we got two problems here. Haman is literally elevated to this position of power by the state, by the government, the same government that's going to promote Esther and Mordecai later on. But what else do we have going on here? I mean, was Esther and Mordecai, were they just the victims of this Haman character that just came on the scene and just automatically hated all of the Jews? He was just born as an anti-Semite. No, what did they do here? What did Haman do? He provoked him. Okay? Haman literally provoked him. Everybody else is honoring this man Haman because he was promoted by the king, but then little Mordecai purposely wants to get Haman infuriated, because if he doesn't create this controversy, the rest of what is about to follow doesn't happen. Now we know, on a most basic level, we know this game is played on us all the time in our lifetime, right? The deep state, if you would, they have to create controversy. They have to create these, always say there's a boogeyman out there, that a hater, an anti-Semite, a racist, somebody who is a hate speech person or whatever. There's always has to be that kind of a person. They have to create that in order to carry forth the false narrative, which you might ask, what does the false narrative do? What's the purpose of it? Well, it justifies wars, okay? Justifies wars. It justifies shutting up your opponent that might expose you for what you're doing to people, and on the list goes, okay? So the point I want to see is get into the story. Mordecai literally just like, all right, I'm going to get this guy to hate me, and then we're going to turn this whole thing around and flip it on its head here. Verse 6, and he thought scorn to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had showed him, the people of Mordecai, wherefore Haman sought to destroy all the Jews that were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus, even the people of Mordecai. Now, does this sound, I mean, how many people do you know in your lifetime that would be offended by one person? I'm a white guy, okay? If a black guy offended me, an Asian, you name it, an Indian. If I got offended by a Native American Indian, am I going to all of a sudden say, I hate all Indians? I mean, how many people are like that? I don't think we really know anybody that's like that. If there is somebody that's like that, you're talking about fringe, lunatic, nuts. There just aren't people that wake up every day saying, I want to hate somebody because of what they look like, okay? This is just over that's what, when we talked about what a fable is. A fable, we were warned to stay away from. The Apostle Paul warned us in the book of Timothy to not be deceived by Jewish fables, okay? There were all these Jewish fables back in the day and how would you identify them? Well, they always had these exaggerations, and these books never gave glory to God. They always elevated the people or the nation and made them into the great heroes, always made them one step ahead of their enemies, always made them so they were almost like the human flesh people were like superhuman, and you couldn't do anything against them, or otherwise the tables would be turned on you. And that's exactly what we see here in this book of Esther. Yet, we think just because it's in the Bible that it has to be read exactly as it is, and you have to just believe it, right? Well, let me ask you this question. When we heard Job's friends talking for about 38 chapters, and they were mentioning God even, Esther and Mordecai never mentioned God, they never prayed and never do any of that. Job's three friends are just rambling on saying, well, this is the great truth about God here. And this is the great, and then God comes in and says to Job, why in the heck were you listening to those idiots? So literally we have, in the book of Job, we have 30 something chapters of people in the Bible saying things that sound somewhat godly or sound truthful, but God says, everything these guys just said in the book of Job or in the Bible is the opposite of what is truth. Okay? This is the same thing with the book of Esther. Okay? And anybody who would read it, seeing these characters right away, again, Esther and Mordecai are pagan gods and goddesses, so you're given the clue right away in their name. But it's not only that, it's everything they do from here on out. Mordecai's provoking this guy to anger. Christians aren't supposed to provoke people to anger. This isn't a fruit that we want to do. If Esther and Mordecai are heroes, I want you guys to pay attention to this, then I want you to teach your kids to be like Mordecai and to be like Esther. If you really believe this book should not be read any other way than Esther and Mordecai are heroes, I want you to teach your children to provoke people to anger. Okay? I want you to teach your daughters to seduce kings. I want you to teach your daughters to use sex and flattery and deception to manipulate her way around kingdoms. Okay? I want you to do that. If you really believe the book of Esther is to be read the way that many of these unsuspecting Christians read it, okay? And I want you to celebrate a pagan holiday called Purim, which comes from the Babylonian divination rituals. And I want you to not turn the other cheek when your enemy offends you, but I want you to literally seek vengeance at all costs. And I want you to teach them that if anybody wrongs you, you turn it around on them and you make them, you humiliate them, make them suffer. In fact, later on, we're going to find out that after Haman's it wasn't enough to kill Haman. They kill his 10 sons. And it wasn't enough that they were dead, but hero Esther said, "Oh, king, I want you to now hang them up on gallows. They're dead bodies. They're already dead. Hang them up on the gallows." Okay? This literally is like when people don't understand this book, there's literally a spell cast upon them because this book is literally the inversion of the gospel, what the gospel teaches. Okay? Jesus teaches the opposite of what these guys do. Okay? So, anyways, I didn't intend to go that deep into that, but Mordecai's got the anger going. And here's a lesson I want us to remember. Okay? When the enemy wants you to be angry, okay, we look out at what's going on. We see the deep state. We see the synagogue of Satan, those who claim they are Jews and are not, but do lie. He doesn't care if honestly, he doesn't care if we know that, as long as if we know it, we're really angry and we lose our credibility. And we just start saying, those son of a, and I just rant about them all day long. They'll be like, okay, we got him mad. We got him saying this because now I'm the Haman, right? Now I fit into the role they want to play. But if we merely expose the lie and say, you know what, this is a great deception. Don't hate these people. Don't go out trying to harm anybody. That just defeated the whole purpose of the deception, right? And they don't like that. So now all they can do is just call you an anti-Semite, which they'll do, right? All right, so in summary of this section, Esther is Ishtar and Mordecai is Marduk, Babylonian gods disguised as Jews, and their sacred day Purim is literally named after a Babylonian occult ritual practiced in Babylon. That we'll get into here in a little bit. Did I skip a few verses here? I must have. Did I skip ahead? Okay. Okay, I should be on 7. All right. In the first month, that is the month Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they cast pur, that is the lot, before Haman from day to day and from month to month to the 12th month. That is the month Adar. So here we got Haman. He's actually doing this. So supposedly Haman is casting this lot, right? This what this is he's divining. In the book of, I think it's in the book of Jeremiah, you'll find out that the Babylonian king, as he was going to go conquer Jerusalem and take the true children of Judah into captivity, he was divining. He was using occult rituals to determine what day he was going to attack. This is important because this is part of this holiday, right? So supposedly, and this is interesting, supposedly Haman is using divination here. Okay, using an occult practice, figuring out when is he going to get little Mordecai back here, okay? When is he going to get him and his people? Okay, whoops. Okay, we're going to take a look at the meaning of the serpent. So we discovered that this whole book, one of the main themes of this book is it's all centered around this holiday, this man-made holiday called Purim. Okay, a holiday that's not commanded anywhere in the Bible. It's not mentioned anywhere else in the Bible, yet in the book of Esther. So where does this holiday come from? Well, like I pointed out, it comes from the word Purim, comes from the word casting lots or divining. And what's interesting is, so we got the serpent. The root word of the serpent means, it's the Hebrew word nakash, and it means to practice divination. Divine, observe signs, learn by experience, diligently observe, practice fortune-telling, take an omen, etc. Now down here in the definition here, we got nakash. It's a primitive root properly. I want you guys to see this. To hiss, to whisper a magic spell. Okay? To whisper a magic spell. That is so important because what this really says to me is this. The book of Purim is just that. It is literally the serpent whispering a magic spell. What is that spell? Well, it makes you think that good is evil and evil is good. The good guys are the bad guys, and the bad guys are the good guys. Light for darkness, darkness for light. It's Satan's number one trick, right? The Bible tells us that he's coming disguised as a minister or as an angel of light. Satan comes disguised as an angel of light. He's not going to come to us with the horns. He comes to his weird worshipers in that form maybe, but not to us. To us, he presents himself as an angel of light. And what do his ministers present them? I'm quoting right from the New Testament here. I can't remember which verse. The book of Corinthians, I believe. 2 Corinthians chapter 2, I think it is. Or 10. But his ministers as ministers of righteousness. Okay? That is the deception. That is the illusion. That is the spell. Satan is good. His followers or his teachers are ministers of righteousness. They're teaching the truth. Okay? So I would ask you this question: who are those people? A lot of people say, "Well, I don't know. That's it's the left wingers. It's all the left wingers," which they are. They're totally controlled by Satan, right? But nobody believes they're preaching righteousness, right? No Christian does. So who's out there disguised as preachers of righteousness that are literally preaching for the synagogue of Satan? Who is it? I might ask you that. If you don't know the answer to that, then you don't even understand what that verse means, right? Because if you can't pinpoint who's doing it, you don't understand what that truth means. It's just some high, lofty thing that sounds biblical and sounds good. Oh, as ministers of righteousness. Well, who are they? I don't know. You think you should know, right? Yes. Okay. That's where we go. All right. Verse 8. And Haman said unto the king Ahasuerus, there is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of thy kingdom. And their laws are diverse from all people, neither keep they the king's laws. Therefore, it is not for the king's profit to suffer them. In other words, Haman says, and it's funny because Haman will say part truths here. Okay? Haman is saying, hey, king, there's a group out there that runs a parallel society. They literally have all this, it's even a shadow government, if you would, right? There's this group out there that does that. But let's take this on the basic level. If we're looking at the fruits of this book, we know that Daniel lived during this time. Daniel, Ezra, and Nehemiah, they lived in the Persian Empire. They lived during the Persian Empire. What did Daniel do? He followed the king's laws. Okay, Daniel was truly of the tribe of Judah. He was not a fake Jew. He was not claiming to be of Judah and was not. He was, but Daniel and the three Hebrew children, they were respected already by the Persian government. They obeyed Persian law. They weren't So what is this talking about here? Okay, this is a lie. Okay, because they did obey that. And what's also interesting, besides the only time that Daniel or the three Hebrew children disobeyed the laws that were put in place by the Persians when they were in captivity or when they were controlled under their rule, was when they made a law to tell the people they couldn't worship God, right? Anytime the state tells you to obey a law that makes you violate God's law, then you disobey it. But that's not what this is talking about. This is talking about a group that just totally does things their way. They totally don't respect the laws of the land. And what did Jesus tell us to do in the New Testament? Did he tell us to purposely disobey? Wherever you live, Christians, whatever nation you live, you make sure you disobey every law they have and form a parallel society that is antagonistic towards the government, by the way, that I put you under because you deserved it, right? God speaking. No, what did he do? He said, render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's. In other words, obey civil law. Because that law, we know the Apostle Paul says, whatever form of government you're under, we know is really the government we deserve as people because of our sins, and we have to work within the confines of that government. Verse 9, if it please the king, let it be written that they may be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver to the hands of those that have the charge of the business to bring it into the king's treasuries. And the king took his ring from his hand and gave it unto Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the Jews' enemy. Okay, who's empowering Haman? We got to remember, the state is. The same state that's going to empower Esther and Mordecai, coming up here, verse 11. And the king said unto Haman, look at this, guys. This is the key right here. The silver is given to thee, the people also to do with them as it seemeth good to thee. So the king literally finances Haman's anti-Semitism here. Okay, so when we talk about manufactured anti-Semitism, we first understand this book's fiction. It's all crafted according to the Babylonian myth of Ishtar and Marduk and the things that they did to gain power and control over the minds of humans, okay, minds of people. And now they're financing, the state is financing this anti-Semitism. Well, since April 2026, a lot of you have probably heard about this, a federal grand jury, and I'm reading here, indicted the SPLC, Southern Poverty Law Center, on multiple felony counts: wire fraud, bank fraud, money laundering conspiracy, for secretly funneling more than $3 million in donor funds from the years 2014 to 2023 to paid informants who were active leaders or members of violent extremist groups. These included the Ku Klux Klan. I'll tell you this, guys, I don't really believe there is such thing as a Ku Klux Klan, okay? It's literally run by government and quasi-government forces to make you disdain anybody who has any kind of belief slightly similar to these nutcases, right? In other words, we know Ku Klux Klan, okay, they hate all Jews, right? So they might be reading a document called the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion. They might have it on their website or something like that. Now, if you have that document on your website, look it. The Ku Klux Klan had that. They read The International Jew by Henry Ford or something like that. Look it, they had that book and you have that. Therefore, you are a dangerous neo-Nazi. And they really are a dangerous Ku Klux Klan guy. And literally the leader of the Ku Klux Klan group, leaders of these groups, are funded by the government. When I say government, you might say, well, what are you talking about? The Southern Poverty Law Center. They've worked hand in hand with the FBI and other government law enforcement groups as sort of their think tank, okay? To say, well, this group, you really need to be aware. We've been studying these guys. We've been watching these guys, you know, and if you see who was on the Southern Poverty Law Center's hate group, you'll find anything from conservative Christians to people who believe that the Caucasians are the 10 lost tribes of Israel. That one they really hate, by the way. That one, why do they hate that so much? Because it breaks the spell, okay? It breaks, when you know who the true Israelites are, it breaks the spell of you literally following this lie that these are God's chosen people over here when you realize where God's chosen people are and where they migrate to. It takes the whole thing down. So I don't care. And I experienced this throughout the years, just teaching that. I'm like, I was attacked by, there was one time years ago where it was obvious to me that I was under systematic attack by somebody being paid, because I was like, there's no way. Somebody like created all these websites, that like literally dozens of websites that says Pastor Ben Heath is just trying to get rich off of these people. And like everybody, anybody who knows sitting at this house right now knows we're not getting rich. And this was a long time ago. And there, all these lies, right? And I realized, I told my wife, I'm like, there's no way. This isn't just some whack job weirdo that just is following me and saying all this stuff. I'm like, this is organized. Nobody has this amount of time in their day to do this. Like this is, but I'm thinking, well, why me? I mean, we have maybe a few hundred people watch our program even back then. And so I'm like, why would they care about me? I'm not like, I don't have a big, huge platform. It's not me or the platform size. It's what is that very few people are saying that thing, and they don't want it to spread. So what their philosophy is, anything that's up and coming or up and growing, they better quash that fire before it spreads. Okay. And like I said, that is the one truth that they hate the most. And that's why they'll say that if you believe that the white Christian nations literally are the descendants of the 10 lost tribes of Israel, they've got this whole narrative already framed to pin on you. You're a neo-Nazi. You're part of the Ku Klux Klan. You're this, you're a Jew hater. You're this and that, okay? All right, I'll finish reading here now. Neo-Nazi groups like the National Alliance, National Socialist Movement, the National Socialist Party of America, American Nazi Party, funded by government sources, Aryan Nations, affiliated Sadistic Souls Motorcycle Club. Last one I have here is they are individually deeply involved in planning and attending the 2017 Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville. They paid somewhere around $270,000 to make racist postings under the Southern Poverty Law Center direction and coordinated transportation. So literally, you guys remember that whole thing where the mainstream media were following the Unite the Right, and there's all this violence and all these guys doing stuff, and you always see these supposed right-wing extremist groups wearing like kind of something that looks like military-style uniforms, and they're marching, and they got their like Nazi flags and all this. This isn't real. It's fake. Okay? We know it is because we literally have a court case. Many of us knew this way before this, right? Many of us have known this for 30 years that this happens. We're like, and because we're aware of it, we don't want somebody coming in here. It literally happened one time, I firmly believe. Years ago, we used to do a Saturday night Bible study. And there was this guy, he comes in here. He came here a couple times, and he starts saying some really weird stuff. And all of a sudden he asked me, and I want to be careful how I word this. He goes, there was a president in office at the time, and he said, you know what? And we were all disappointed. We didn't like this president because he was bringing a lot of bad stuff on our country. And he looks at me, he goes, you know what? I was ex-military. I was in the special forces. And I could literally get a group of men together today or soon to go storm the White House and take out this president. And he looked at me and said, should we do that? Or something of that effect. And I'm sitting here thinking, I feel like I'm in a drug sting or something. Like he's recording me and waiting for me to say yes. Because if I would have said yes, I'm in prison. I'm like, nobody just comes to my house, only being here like the second or third time, and presents a question like that to me. If it's not for nefarious purposes, okay? And knowing that I knew these traps ahead of time, I knew right away, I'm like, whoa, dude, no. So then I immediately shut him down. I'm like, I don't believe in violence. This is a spiritual war we're in, so I don't want any part of that, what you're talking about. And you know what? He never showed back up. All right? There were some other bizarre things that had happened around here, and I don't want to get into deep down in the rabbit trails during that time, but it happens. It's real, okay? U.S. examples. I'm just going to briefly go over there. The United States government itself has been involved in creating, manufacturing hate groups, Hamans, you name it. From the years 1979 to 1992, there was something called Operation Cyclone, where the CIA with Saudi and the Pakistanis provided billions in arms, training, and funding to Afghan Mujahideen fighting with the Soviets. And I'll just paraphrase. Later on, these same groups ended up becoming what is known as Al-Qaeda, and so on and so forth. And a lot of people have talked about how the government literally funded bin Laden, and all of a sudden bin Laden's the guy that takes down our towers, right? Like, how did that happen? And then other cases, such as the Iran-Contra scandal, I'll just read it, include the rebels in, then it says, and selective arming of Syrian opposition groups during the civil war, which aligned with or became ISIS, which became ISIS. So anyways, you guys can go deep down those rabbit trails if you want, but this happens. The enemy has to create a Haman because he has to change the narrative. He doesn't want good Christian people looking like the good guys trying to stop evil. He wants a good guy trying to stop evil to look like a very evil, wicked guy that must be stopped. Literally casts a spell on all the people. So all the people attack the good guy for saying the right things and then protecting the bad guy. It's amazing how it works. Recently here, Israel, the nation of Israel, the secular state of Israel, funded, it says here, Qatari funding to Hamas. And in the details here, it says Israel explicitly approved and coordinated hundreds of millions, up to 1.8 billion total from Qatar to Hamas in Gaza. Their suitcases of cash and transfers funded salaries, infrastructure, and governance under Hamas rule. Netanyahu's governments defended this as preventing humanitarian collapse and maintaining quiet, buying calm on the border. Critics, including some Israeli officials post-October 7th, argue it propped up Hamas as a counterweight to the Palestinian Authority Fatah, preventing the unified Palestinian statehood negotiations. So in other words, what was going on here is Israel just recently, and they've been doing this, they just got caught doing it in this one case. But literally what they do is they create these leaders, they fund them, They fund these leaders. In this case, the case that they got caught doing it, they were giving millions of dollars to the Qatari government to hide the money trail. Then the Qatari government gave the money to these terrorist groups. So Israel gave money to Qatar. Qatar gave it to the terrorist groups. So then the terrorist groups would attack Israel. And then what would Israel get to do? Hey, we're the victims. We're being attacked. We're going to start a world war. We're going to go get the Iranians, the Persians. Okay. You guys, this is a very timely book because you guys know what? Ancient Persia is Iran today. Okay. Did you know that the recent war against Iran started, and Jonathan Cahn even acknowledges this, okay, this isn't my supposition, started on Purim, okay? On Purim, the holiday where it says that the Jews' enemy, these aren't real Jews, by the way, these are fake Jews, attack their enemies. So every Purim, you see this almost every year when Purim comes around, it's in the spring, it's about a month before Passover, they attack their enemies in one way or the other because it's a ritual to them. They have to do this because it's part of this book of Esther. It's part of the plan, and so on. All right, moving on. Esther chapter 3, verse 12, it says, "Then were the king's scribes called on the 13th day of the first month, and there was written according to all that Haman had commanded unto the king's lieutenants and to the governors that were over every province and to the rulers of every people of every province according to the writing thereof. And to every people after their language, in the name of King Ahasuerus was it written and sealed with the king's ring. Okay. That thing that went out on that day, that decree, was the decree to go kill all the Jews, right? This is the, in World War II terminology, this is the supposed final solution, okay? The final solution. So the number 13 is an interesting number. That's when Purim takes place, okay? It takes place on the 13th of Adar. And that's right around, around our marches, okay? They go by the lunisolar calendar, so it's not the same fixed date every year. But the number 13 is interesting. Through the occult, if you're in the occult and if you practice witchcraft, and this is what this number means to you. It means power through controlled chaos and replacement, which is interesting because when you look at this book, Haman supposedly was plotting to kill all of the Jews for a whole year, from the 13th day of the first month to the 13th day of Adar. Now, what's going to happen, we're going to see in the subsequent chapters, we're going to see the reversal. It's literally Haman's plan to kill all the Jews is going to turn around on him. Haman's going to get killed, his family, and 75,000 Persians, okay? And then what it's going to look like is a perfect reversal. It's going to look like the promoters of the book of Haman say, look it, this is God's divine hand. He reversed the judgment upon Haman. But what they don't realize is they had a whole year to orchestrate this plan, okay? That's how they do these things. They usually buy themselves enough time, but they always make it look like it was a divine thing, like the 6-day war, the 1960, God surely gave us the victory, okay? They have a lot of time to orchestrate what's going to happen because when you have a network of people deep inside governments, we call it the deep state. And interesting, people kind of woke up to that part of that, at least during the last 10 years, that really exists. But that network is around and they have all these levers so they can make things look supernatural or only God could do this, okay? But that's the magician's trick, right? If you're a wizard or a magician, you're making what you're doing magic, but it's really explainable. If you could see the trick, there's really no magic involved in it at all, right? I pulled my thumb off. You guys see that? Oh, man. But once everybody realized I did that and that, oh, he didn't really pull his thumb off, okay? It was a trick, okay? And so that's the whole purpose of wizardry. You make something look supernatural, and it's really just, you're totally it's supernatural in this sense. You know how to control somebody's mind to not see what's really there, okay? You know how to control their mind to not see what's there so they believe it, okay? I'm talking about how the dark side does it, okay? I could go into the dates, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because I think I've probably already gone a pretty long time. Occult dates mean something to Satan and his followers. They like to do things it's a ritual. It's a part of a ritual, right? It's a religious thing to them. Just like we like to celebrate Resurrection Day the same time every year, okay? And churches have their different things that they do or whatever. Well, the pagans do the same thing. Satan worship, they want to create this ritual. What's interesting in 9/11 in symbolism, 9 represents completion, initiation, the end of a cycle. It is the number of magic. Okay, now check this out. Did 9/11 just happen on 9/11 by accident? By the way, that was the day that the Pentagon was, I didn't realize that the Pentagon was literally built and opened officially on September 11th, like 1946 or something like that, the new Pentagon building, on 9/11. All right, so 9 represents completion, initiation, and the end of a cycle. 11 is the number of magic. Okay, 11 is the number of magic, duality, and the twin pillars, Boaz and Jachin, in Masonic or Kabbalistic lore. Together, 9/11 invokes the destruction of the old orders, twin towers as the pillars, to birth the new one through what? Chaos. Chaos. And then we could go on and how all this works. There's this huge thing going on and with dates and numbers and when things happen. And, people just don't even know what's going on, right? Totally in the dark of that there are evil people plotting evil things, okay? A lot of people understand there's a devil, right? You know there's a devil, okay? Is he conspiring against God? Yeah. Well, you're a conspiracy theorist because you just said the devil's conspiring against God. So you should never be believed. Nobody should ever believe you because you said that word conspiracy, right? Anyways, verse 13, and the letters were sent by the post unto all the king's provinces to destroy, to kill, to cause to perish all Jews, both young and old, little children and women, in one day, even upon the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month Adar, and to take a spoil of them for a prey. Again, one big problem is anything this major would have been recorded in Persian history, and it was not. Okay. Verse 14, the copy of the writing for a commandment to be given in every province was published unto all people that they should be ready against that day. The posts went out, being hastened by the king's commandment, and the decree was given in Shushan the palace, and the king and Haman sat down to drink. Now I want you to pay attention to this word here. But the city Shushan was perplexed. There was confusion and chaos. Okay? That is what they need to first create. It's like Satan's the master at dividing and conquering, right? Get everybody fighting against each other, and then he comes in and brings the solution, right? The solution to all the problem. But just that is something they need to do. You got to create the controversy. Okay, in closing, I'll sum up this study this way, and I've referenced it several times. The wizard's spell breaks the moment you see the illusion. So as we're studying this book of Esther, I hope that you guys are beginning to see the illusion. You're beginning to see the inversion that's happened, that the light is put for darkness and darkness for light. And once we start piecing this together, we are no longer under that mind control of the enemy. All right, with that said, we'll take questions and comments.
Yeah, the more we dig into this, the more fascinating it is to me. It almost makes me wonder if the false Jews had something to do with creating Hitler. Because that was like one of the biggest things that have gotten the Jews the most sympathy.
That's a good point that you bring up. There's supposition that, think about this, what the meaning of that, the Holocaust and all that means a burnt sacrifice or an offering. Who would call something, I got to get the camera, who would call something that, if it was that something this horrendous, right, where this happened, who would call that a burnt offering? I mean, like, what? A burnt offering? Does anybody even ask that question? It should be called something like a different word than an offering. Who's making this offering and to what? It is interesting that it's almost as if Hitler was the priest making the offering for the dark side, the occultism. It seemed like he was involved in the occult and stuff like that. There's supposition that he was funded by the Rothschilds, that they actually helped him in his rise to power, which doesn't make sense to a lot of people. Like Rothschilds, they claim to be of Judah. Why would they be helping this guy that hates Judah? Why would that happen? And how did these powerful elite people who claim to be of Judah, how did they escape the Holocaust, but the poorer Jews didn't? What happened there? Looks like an offering to me. If I was to be like, okay, I'm going to offer somebody up, what's the purpose of the offering? Well, what happened after? A lot of things happened after that, right? Number one, they've permanently gained the status of victimhood. Okay, we are the world's greatest victims. And here's what's alarming about this. There were those that claim they were Jews and are not during that same time period, during World War II. The communist leaders, the leaders of the communists were all of that same supposed bloodline, right? Karl Marx, Lenin, they all literally were of that bloodline. Karl Marx was the son of a Jewish rabbi, okay? They say that 6 million were killed in the Holocaust. Well, when people look at how many people died under the rule of communism, which was under the rule of those people claiming to be of that tribe that were the victims, there was upwards of, I don't know, I think somebody says 30 or 70 million Christians killed, murdered by the communists in World War II. We see a huge inversion going. Why don't we hear anything about that? I mean, even if there were 6 million, some people say there was only 2 million living in that area at that time, but let's just say there were 6 million. That's horrible. Okay, nobody should do that. But then, why is it never talked about that 30 million or 70 million, whatever it is? I want you guys to look this up on your own. Died under communist rule. That's the bigger atrocity, but it's not. That doesn't matter. If you're a white Christian, you deserve to die anyways. Really, I mean, that's really, you should hate yourself. Hate yourself for being in America. We're taught that, our children are taught that in schools, right? The white guilt thing. Hate yourself because you're white. Your ancestors were terrible. It's the great inversion, right? Anyways, one other quick point about that. I think I summed up some major points of supposition of what could have happened. Oh, the finality of that. After World War II, they got the permanent status of victimhood, which enabled them to get what? The Holy Land, Jerusalem. So the big prize was getting Jerusalem. And if you're looking at it from a pagan perspective, if you're a rich, powerful someone of the synagogue of Satan, you say, okay, we'll sacrifice some of our own bloodline. We'll sacrifice some of them for control of Jerusalem. We'll sacrifice it to Big Daddy and we'll get control of Jerusalem. Get ready for that third temple so that when the Big Daddy comes, if he's got a temple here for him, we can welcome him. And now we've got world control because now we got the big man here with us.
Yeah, and of course, we're talking about the false Jews, the ones that claim to be Jews but are of the synagogue of Satan. We're not talking about true Jews.
Well, that's exactly right. And like I brought up in the beginning, Esther and Mordecai were Babylonian gods and goddesses. They were not Jews. They were not of Judah. So what people like Jonathan Cahn was saying, anti-Semites hate the book of Esther. I want to say to Jonathan, if you truly love the Jews and you truly love the truth, why are you not telling them that they're revering pagan Babylonian gods? I love the Jews. I even love the fake Jews. I want them to repent. I don't want them to keep doing evil and have this free reign to cast spells over our people. I don't want that to happen because it doesn't help our people out and it doesn't help them out. They need to see the stern reality that what they're doing is very, very evil and wicked. And that's love.
Yeah, and I'm sometimes, I don't know, I guess I could call it, I'm fact-checking you sometimes while you're preaching it. And it just fascinates me because, last week I looked up Esther and Mordecai or whatever, and even Google, if Google is telling you this, then you know, because if anything would hide something, it would be Google, you would think.
And sometimes, even if it's the truth, that AI or Google will say, only fringe people would say that. But it doesn't even say that here in this case. It doesn't say this is a fringe theory.
Right. It actually says that Esther and Mordecai are from the names Marduk and Esther or whatever, the pagan gods.
And that it was fictional novel and not actually recorded in Persian history.
Yeah, it does acknowledge, and I received a lot of flack for that in the first study from some people. How could you say the word of no? It's not just because, and I don't want to get deep into this. Just because a certain group of men got together and they said these are the official canonized books of the Bible does not mean that every single one of those books. I think they all are, except for the Book of Esther. I think that's the abomination that's in the holy place, the Word of God. But I do think it belongs in the Bible because I think God wants us to see how the wizard casts its spell on the people.
That's what I think. It allows it to be known, the people that have eyes to see and ears to hear.
Right.
So I think it's definitely there for a purpose. And then in part of my fact checking, I was looking up where it says that to beware of Jewish fables, and sure enough, in Titus 1:14. The Apostle Paul warns Titus not to pay attention to Jewish fables and commandments of men that turn from the truth. And then it says, Paul elaborates on this with a few other places, commonly warning against myths and fabrications. This is the part in 1 Timothy 1:4, he urges Timothy to command certain people not to give heed to the fables and endless genealogies which minister questions rather than godly edifying, which is in faith. Okay, that wasn't the one I was looking for either. But either way, the point is that it's all over in the Bible to warn of these fables, of these.
Well, and one might say, well, how could you say that the Book of Esther is? I mean, it's in my Bible. I'm looking at it in my King James Bible, the Book of Esther. Well, let's go back further than the canonized Bible. In the Dead Sea Scrolls. That's where all the manuscripts were of all the entire Old Testament was found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, minus one book, the Book of Esther. That tells you the Book of Esther was not originally in the canon of Scripture. It was not part of the Bible. It got added in later. Okay, it got added in later. But it's a hard topic because it makes people really worry that there could be a book that was snuck in by Satan into the Bible, and it makes them worry. Like I said before, I think God allowed it for us to see, and we're going to get into it in the subsequent chapters. There are 5 hidden acrostics in this book where God's name is hidden, and I believe every single one of those hidden places has a specific meaning to it, which will be fascinating, I think, when we get to it.
Which my final point is that I looked up what Esther means. And in the Persian history, it means one thing. And in Hebrew, it means hidden, which is interesting. The name sounds like the root word Hester, meaning hidden. This perfectly aligns with the book of Esther, which is famous for being the only book in the Bible that does not explicitly mention the name of God.
Or prayer.
Who put that in there?
Who put what?
The book. I mean, we know John.
You want to hand the mic to her?
I don't. Who actually, you have the disciples that are, responsible for certain chapters and stuff. Who's responsible for Esther?
The book of how it got in the Bible?
Who wrote it?
Who wrote it? Who put that in there?
So I don't think we know for sure. There's supposition that during Daniel's time, remember that group that hated Daniel and they wanted to get him arrested and thrown into the lion's den because he prayed to God. And they were jealous of him because he was very powerful under the king. So the supposition is after that happened, the people that tried to set the trap for Daniel to get him thrown in the lion's den, Nebuchadnezzar then threw them into the lion's den and they got eaten by the lions. So there's this idea or theory, one of the relatives of those who got thrown into the lion's den hated Daniel so much and hated the true children of Judah that they came up with this elaborate scheme of revenge to get back at Daniel and his people, or the true Israelites, and came up with this whole story to reverse everything that was actually true. So that's just one theory. I don't know if that is the case or
Wasn't it
not.
like during the time of Ezra and Nehemiah that some evil people snuck into the church? Because that aligns with the timing of Daniel and when, because the person who wrote it obviously knew.
You don't have the mic. We should hand that over.
I'm right next to you though.
Well, yeah, but we want our viewers to have a good experience and not strain. Sorry.
I'm just saying that during the time of Ezra and Nehemiah was when you think that the church was infiltrated by these so-called fake Jews. And that aligns with the timing of Daniel and when all of this went down, that the person who actually wrote it was from that time frame, knew the historical stuff.
Right. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. What she's saying is during the time of when Ezra and Nehemiah returned to rebuild the temple and the wall of Jerusalem, only a small remnant of true Judah, not the 10 tribes of Israel, just a small remnant of the tribe of Judah and Benjamin returned with Ezra and Nehemiah. And it specifically stated that there was a huge problem with these foreigners coming in and literally trying to be the priest, be a part of the priesthood. And they literally could not find anybody who could document their lineage to the tribe of Levi because they were looking for priests and so on and so forth. So the infiltration of the serpent seed heavily began after the Babylonian captivity, during the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, during the time when this book of Esther was supposedly written. So it was basically what was happening was the true children of Judah were losing their identity. Most of them didn't even live in Jerusalem or in the Holy Land at this time. Most of them had already migrated north into Europe at this time. Were not even around. And so this also explains when Jesus was talking to the scribes and Pharisees, there are some historical accounts where they describe Jesus as being this golden-colored, blue-eyed, or golden-haired, blue-eyed guy, very sweet countenance. And then his antagonizers were these guys that had a darker, more dusky complexion with tawny beards and so on and so forth. And so he said that Jesus, it was interesting, the writer of this historical document, I'm trying to remember who it was in a book called the Arco Volume, which they say, oh, that's a forgery and all this, but you decide for yourself. They said that Jesus him and his mom looked like what you would consider an old-fashioned Jew to look like. In other words, it looked like the Jews used to look like way back in the day, and Jesus looked like that. But these other people who were attacking him, who Jesus literally called, you're of your father the devil, you're the offspring of the serpent, and all this kind of stuff. Jesus said that to them, right? So it makes a whole lot of sense that what had happened is you had the stolen identity happened during the time when this book of Esther was written, in this time period, and has only increased since that time. So it's been 2,500 years that the true children of Judah were already losing their identity. There really weren't that many, I don't think, of true Judah left in Jerusalem during the days of Jesus. That's my opinion. And so,
I just pulled up here, it says the book of Esther is an anonymous text.
okay.
The
Anonymous.
original author's identity is not mentioned in Scripture.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah, we don't know. We don't know who wrote it.
Satan.
Yeah.
Now, we have a few comments here. Philip, being his usual goofy self, says, fortune smelling. These are probably things that were said during your preaching. But,
Oh, sure. When we were talking about casting
yeah.
lots.
And then I believe in violins, he says. And then Jean says, I have a disconnect, though. Didn't Mordecai warn the king of the plot to kill him? Maybe you addressed this and I missed it.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. No, So in the last chapter, I believe it was at the end of last chapter, Mordecai supposedly discovered a plot, an assassination plot on the king, but then never told the king about this. And it's going to be selectively pulled out by Esther, or it's going to selectively come about here in the next chapter, the next couple chapters. And that's how Mordecai is going to all of a sudden get advanced and Haman's going to start coming down, because Mordecai, was really, I guess, this great hero, right, that saved the king's life. But that's another reason why that this book is a fable, because it's designed in such a way that it's not realistic. It doesn't follow any real logic. If the king was about to be assassinated and Mordecai figured that out and exposed that, the king would know right away. You're not going to wait till a few chapters later when the king's up reading the Chronicles in the middle of the night, just decides to wake up, he couldn't sleep, and he's just reading some historical records that happened and said, oh, there was a plot against my life, and this guy named Mordecai saved me. Okay? And it's going to be hilarious when we get there. This only gets better. This plot only thickens. It's pretty fascinating.
They continue with, I have questioned the book of Esther for a long time, but can't connect all the dots yet, unless it was a way to gain favor of the king for himself. All the other books of the canon have historical backup. Esther does not.
Yep, correct. And anybody can do that research. Say, you'll find Christians now these days, the Zionist Christians, they'll try to make this fit into history and try to they got to try to, but my question to them is, why try so hard to make this historical when it's not, number one? And number two is, you're trying to make this historical and true, but you haven't tested the fruit of the book like we talked about earlier, that, Jesus taught us how to identify false teachings, false prophets, false ministers of righteousness. He says, test the fruit. And that's why I did that in the beginning. I'm like, if you don't want your daughter doing what Esther did, and you don't want your son growing up and being like Mordecai, then the fruit probably isn't very good. Therefore, it's bad. Good fruit does not, grow on a bad tree, and bad fruit doesn't grow on a good tree.
Yeah, that was a great point. Our Prevo says, it was apparently accepted by the Great Synagogue 500 to 300 BC. Simon the Just, high priest, another one not mentioned in Scripture.
Yeah, which would bring us around, that would bring us around that time, just, 100, 200 years before Jesus, 100 to 300 years before Jesus, when the big turnaround was happening, right? The true children of Judah were losing their identity, and the false ones were moving in saying, hey, we're actually God's chosen people. We're happy to do his work. And then they, wrote the Talmud, which is, a lot of people think that, Orthodox Judaism is, they just go by the Old Testament. They just minus Jesus, right? They just don't see it yet. They don't go by the Old Testament. You find out that their main book is called the Talmud, okay? And it's a bunch of writings of men that Jesus literally said at the time. He said, you guys, as he was talking to the scribes and Pharisees, the Jewish religious leaders, he pointed at them and said, you make the word of God void or meaningless by your traditions, or by the traditions of men you make. He was specifically referring, no doubt, everybody that studied this knows he was specifically referring to the Talmud, because that's where the traditions of men were bound together in a book, their holy book that they revere higher than the Bible itself. And then it even goes even further than that. You're going to find out that a lot of the people that claim to practice Judaism actually follow what's called the Kabbalah, ancient Kabbalah, and it's Jewish mysticism or occultism, which the Kabbalah itself literally is the religion, if you would. It's like if you see that they got this Kabbalistic tree of life, that's their main symbol, and it's literally like this weird kind of a tower-like structure and has a serpent coiling around it. So the Kabbalistic religion is literally the religion of Satan. It's of the serpent.
Yeah, for me, it just boils down to they don't believe in Christ, which makes them antichrists. And they're right then and there. God has already explained what happens to people that are like that. But that's all I got.
Right? Anything else? Were there any other questions on there? Nobody brave over there? You don't want to be on camera. That's what it is. You don't want the camera to... I got my fancy camera switcher here. I'll put you on there anyways. No, I don't know. Who do I have on there? Oh, Jacob. Jacob, wave to the camera. All right. Camera shy. All right. All right. Hey, we want to thank everybody for joining us. Until next time, stay in His Word every single day so that you can be a Christian overcomer. God bless.
Great sign burning in the sky, woman crying, crowned with light. Dragon waiting at her feet, teeth like night, heart